Hello everybody. I'd like to welcome you tonight to this webinar, which is run by University of Greenwich, to the Zoom and to the YouTube live stream attendees. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Glenn Boddington and I'm a reader in digital immersion at University of Greenwich. And I'm also Creative Director of the Body Data Space Collective. Tonight we are starting the first of a 4-talk series of webinars which will take place across the next few months. These talks are linked to knowledge exchange and sharing on tech innovations, and it is part of an Innovate UK project with 3 partners: University of Greenwich, ZUK Interactive Theatre and Body Data Space Collective. The project is called DATUM R&D. This first talk today is about remote intimacy in times of social distancing, a very topical issue. And as you can see on the slide ahead of you, in front of you, we have 5 speakers who have joined us for today. The structure of today is an hour-and-a-half session, and I will be doing an introduction and some housekeeping, and then a contextual input of a few minutes. And then I will go to the speakers in alphabetical order to get 5 minutes input from them about their work and their thinking in this area of remote intimacy. After that, I will take them into a 20-minute discussion between them, and then I will take the questions that will go into the question box at the bottom of your screens, which you can see a question and answer button, and that's where you can put your questions. And you can also upvote questions for me to pick up later in this webinar and to share with the speakers. Now, we are doing this on Zoom and on the live stream on YouTube, but it is a webinar. And so unfortunately, we don't see you all. And well, we see you're there. We can see the participants, but we can't hear your voices. So it's very important for us to receive your inputs in the chat room and in the questions box. So we're very much encouraging an active input into the chat, not long inputs, because nobody ever reads it all, apart from we will be putting in the bios of the speakers for you so that you can keep up with them. But do put in links of your own and of other projects and other companies, etc., that you know are related directly to this topic, and pop them in there as you go so that we can actually take them into the transcript from the chat room, which will be added to the YouTube on the University of Greenwich YouTube streams post the event. This post-event document will be used as a knowledge exchange resource by University of Greenwich, but it will also be used for anyone publicly too, to keep sharing where we are today, from looking at the past, looking at the present, and talking to the future around this really interesting point in time where remote intimacy through social distancing has been in a way forced on us all universally through this pandemic and the COVID-19 scenario. Additionally, do remember to tweet. We've got a hashtag on the top of this slide, #NudgePush21. We're very much happy to have a tweet stream growing. And do go to Zoom full screen if you need to for the slides and the videos that the speakers will be showing so that you can get close up on that and see the movies and slides closely. Now, just to say about the question box, we're going to say now that we will not be able to answer every question, and I will be moderating those and taking them into grouping some of the similar ones together so that we can put those into the speakers and give them more time to speak. So do upvote rather than repeat questions to help me as the moderator to get this to happen. And one other thing, we're not going to take any techie questions today. We'd like to keep this debate around the concepts, around the philosophies, and around the futures of this area. So, remote intimacy. Here we are. We are working tonight across time and space. We're all of us remote in this scenario today. And we want to have an intimate time. But it's quite ironic in these kind of formats, such as webinars and video conferencing of all type, to try and make a more intimate scenario. Tonight, we have 10 people working on this Zoom, into this webinar. 6 of us are in London. The core team, Karen Ward, myself, and Bree Powell from Body Data Space and Jaylan Ahed. And Stephanie and and Clemens, the two speakers, are also based in London. But I'd like to say a particular thank you and to point out here that Rebecca Allen is joining us from LA and is actually 8 hours behind us. We're at 6:30 BST, which is GMT +1. And Paul Miller is joining us from New York, and he's 5 hours behind us. And Raza, who is the production and technical director, Fakar Raza, for this event, is actually in Lahore in Pakistan and is working 4 hours ahead of us. And most of all, we'd like to thank Misaki Fujihata, who is actually joining us from Tokyo 8 hours ahead and at 2:30 a.m. in the morning. So thank you, Misaki, for taking this time. So where are you? Would you please do let us know in the chat box? Do tell us where you are and do actually say hello. We'd love to know from all over the world where people are coming in from. This will help us understand this virtual physical intimacy that we're trying to set up, not just in this webinar, but in many, many every day all across the world today. So I can see some going into the chat box now, which is wonderful. So this webinar and the talks that we're going to do in it are going to look at the past, present and future ways of continuing to evolve us as virtual and physical beings. Telepresence and its ability to enable sustainability as well as incredibly good exchange between people across time and space has been a focus in my work since 1991. And this evening I've gathered together some unique pioneers and future thinkers who will point to ongoing hybrid engagement of our bodies in virtual space and the growing ability that we're going to have to break down barriers, build trust and grow intimacy, hopefully to create a better world for us all. We're not looking for solutions tonight. If anything, we're looking for the next questions that we all must ask, that we all must research and we all must approach. So do look to the future and try to suggest some options and outcomes that could occur. And do also point out some of the negatives that are happening now, but also could come in the future. This imperative topic of our times is about communication. And lockdown has, in a weird way, become a slightly horrendous universal research group for many of us who have been pioneering in this telepresence area. But what it has done is fast-tracked forward many of us into literally facing ourselves in telepresence spaces every day. My first influence was the Apollo landing. I was about 7, and I think this is said by many people. I watched it many times on television, and what I was totally struck by, for me, wasn't actually that we got a rocket to the moon, but that we could see and hear these people on the moon. And I just got obsessed by this communication at a huge distance across time and space. After that, I started to work from the dance sector, and working with technologies started to create telepresence spaces and remote stage connection in around 91, and working on virtual physical blending since the mid-90s. Now, there were many others in the space at the time, not many, but enough of us, but we had to find each other because we were in different countries. And that work I was doing then was with Shinkansen, and it was part of the Butterfly Effect Network. But equally, I'd just like to mention some of my other dance colleagues at the time, Company in Space in Australia, who very much influenced me. Yakov Sharir, at Austin University in Texas, and many others. And any other links that people have got who know this area in the audience, do pop them into the chat box for us now. What we were looking at the time was to look at the re-examination of identity and live presence and the expanded sense of tele-intuition within these spaces. I and the Shinkansen Collective, which moved into the Body Space Data Space Collective in the early 2000s, particularly obsessed by trying to get to virtual touch. And I believe one of my main dance people is in the audience tonight, Leanne Hammercott, who's joined us, who was a key person in the massive amount of experiments we did on trying to reach virtual touch through telepresence stages. Others at the same time were exploring bodies on the sensors on the body and connectivity through sensors. And I'd like to mention Kirk Woolford there. It was a very early expansion of looking at bodysuits and connected bodysuits and actually how the body could feel through those suits, even at a distance. In 1999, I brought together about 10 or 12 of these pioneers and experimenters into a symposium at Middlesex University called The Virtual Physical Bodies. It was looking at the future synthesis of the blending of the virtual and physical. And this led into a whole range of workshops, which us and many others were involved in. The Cell Bite series, linked to Arizona State University, Corpus Online between Lisbon and London, and a whole set of work called Skin, Touch, Feel, trying to go deeper. And I'd like to mention again one particular piece in 2012 that Joseph Hyde and I did at the National Theatre called Me and My Shadow, where we took further telepresence alongside motion capture and virtual worlds and created a live links between London, Istanbul, Brussels and Paris, enabling people to meet in those spaces without any wires attached to them. And that was key for us. The dance sector flourished in this area, with lots of people playing with different things, from Wayne McGregor to Mark Tompkins and many others. Please pop them in the chat box because I know some of you are here. And equally, the music sector started to make live links. In the 90s in the ICA, we were all working with Hyperjam, which was run by Derek Richards and Mark Booth, and made links all across the world to bring musicians together into improvised and structured improvised scenarios. Now, today, we are all Zoomified out, but I can assure you that the experimentation has gone on behind the scenes and actually has gone into a fast forward push, and we will get some examples of that tonight. And it's imperative that we find these new ways to actually build this trust and intimacy. Many of us could not attend live events anyway. There's access issues linked to mobility, to finance, to childcare, to senior care. Flights cost money, and they also are not sustainable. And we're all aware of this with the reduction of pollution in the world during lockdown. Diversity and inclusivity is deeply part of this link up because we can reach out interculturally to others and we start to extend our understanding and knowledge exchange, and we can barter skills in this arena. And these shared creative environments can make very positive shifts. We look at physical gaming, for example, which is a very big shift from just sitting at the computer working with the functions to just sit there and become unphysical in your lives, children becoming unphysical. Now they can move within these gaming environments. So we're dissolving boundaries and we're building high quality debates and common understandings, and we can create pre-event and post-event knowledge transfer through this too. And I think some of the co-creation processes that are coming through and are evolving are absolutely fascinating, particularly fast at the moment. And we will come back to some of these points. Additionally, we will come back to look at body data and biometrics, a big issue which we all need to take on board, particularly in relationship to remote intimacy. So now I'm going to go to our first speaker. And I'm very, very happy. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's amazing to have you here. And Rebecca Allen, I'm going to come to you first. Rebecca, you're a pioneer in the motion graphics area, and you've been examining the body as a digital space and in the digital since many, many years. And we're very much looking forward to your presentation. So Rebecca, can I ask you to turn on mic and video? You've done some amazing work. You've influenced many of us. And I think particularly to put two references into this audience of more well-known names would be Twyla Tharp, working with her with the first motion live graphics on stage ever done. And one that everybody will know, the Kraftwerk's We Are Robots motion graphics, which I know you developed in Berlin with Kraftwerk many years ago. And that's an image that fits into most people's image of new representation of a digital body. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca for her input tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be here. And it's such a relevant topic to me and my history as well. Oh, and by the way, with the Kraftwerk, it's music nonstop, and we worked in Dusseldorf, but places, spaces, and we work remotely a lot too, of course. So because I was interested in computers so long ago as an artist, I worked a lot and continued to work in research labs. So in this, I'm going to just kind of touch on some of the research side that tie into art projects, but the theme I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to just share a screen with some images here. Okay, let me do that. And just want to make sure that these are seen okay, I assume, by everyone?
Yes, we can see those, Rebecca.
Okay, great. So I bring up intimate interfaces. This was actually a category of research that I've been working on with various teams over many years. And Ghislaine brought up the Catherine wheel. I didn't put a picture of that, but that was done in 1982. And it was, in fact, putting a digital human character with a dancer together. So trying to, and actually put them in the same three-dimensional space, virtual character and physical dancer. So that was one of my earlier attempts at thinking about this idea of what's happening to our body, what's happening to space, what's happening to relationships between the physical and virtual, and particularly with a human and relationship focus. But then in 1997 to 2000, I put together a complex project called the Bush Soul with the idea of I'm going to just focus on interfaces on this. In this case, it's a blurry video image, but the interface to this virtual world was through a haptic joystick. So I was concerned about virtual reality and always asking, where's the body going to be? And what role does the physical body have as we all enter these virtual spaces? So by using a force feedback or haptic joystick, you could navigate with it through the world, but you'd also at times feel vibrations based on places you were at or interactions you were having with some of the artificial life that was in that. Then I continued in 2001 with this notion of virtuality and physicality. And in this case, this was an early augmented reality piece called Coexistence. It's, again, a fuzzy video image of that time, but I'd have two people sitting across from each other, not close enough to really talk to each other, but they would interact through holding this interface, and with their breath, they could blow into this device. They're in a augmented, in this time, in this period in 2001, the augmented reality was in a virtual space with video see-through and a camera. So you're mixing the two. Here's a low-res version of it. And by using your breath, you could interact with devices, and you were both working together on these kind of games to share this augmented reality experience. When one person would blow, they'd see this stream of particles, and the other person would feel their breath through this haptic feedback. So again, I was trying to use the sense of touch as a way to convey to actually feel someone's breath. Jumping to another project, when I was working at a lab called MIT Media Lab Europe in Dublin, and had a research team called Liminal Devices. And one art project we did, again, was thinking about, by liminal, I was thinking about the fact that we will all be living in these simultaneous realities, both physical and virtual simultaneously. And now I think we're all understanding that more. In this artwork, at one point, there's a physical box, there's two people engaging. Again, the body is just hanging outside. It's like the head is the only thing engaged in the virtual space. And then another part of this, you'd see, we capture people's faces, and then in a virtual world, you'd see their faces. And then again, with a unique kind of breath interface, someone would interact through their breath. I can't go into a lot of detail that I'm probably already taking too much time. So another thing is called myophone, eyeglass displays, eventually getting rid of those clunky displays, early work with eyeglass displays. But again, how do you interact, and how do you interact in an intimate way? And by intimate, it meant we're doing all of this interaction sometimes in public. So in this case, we were using muscle sensors, EMG sensors you'd wear on your bicep, and by contracting your muscles in various patterns, you would be interacting with your eyeglass displays. So there's a little picture of the displays. These were some of the first eyeglass displays out there. And in fact, we gave a demo to Sergey and Larry, the founders of Google. And I was told later that this is what sparked them to get into AR and to end up with something like Google Glass and what they're doing now. So I also kept going with that idea. I headed a research lab for Nokia in LA called Nokia Research Hollywood, and did more work with these, what we call subtle eyes-free mobile inputs. So if we're living in a liminal world, virtual, physical, how do you navigate through both of those worlds through these eyeglasses? And then how do you interact? So we were looking at things like jewelry, like rings, that could be your interface to these glasses. We'd also be building these necklaces and jewelry and other wearable devices loaded with all sorts of sensors. And this would be a way to interact with each other and interact remotely. We work with different kind of tables and moving data into phones and over to other displays. So we were really trying to understand this notion of intimate interfaces. And of course, with virtual reality, I mean, that's been intriguing to me, because in a way you're in the same space, the same virtual space, and that can be very powerful in a virtual reality experience. So I'll hand this over and we can discuss this more as we go further. And
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Intimate interfaces. I think this will cross over back into several of the talks, so we'll come back to that. And actually now I will invite Stephanie to join us. Stephanie Alès, if we can move across to you with your video and mic open. Stephanie and I have met actually through the creative industry scene, through the tech scene in London, I think, originally, and then we actually meet each other on the presentation circuit quite often. And Stephanie's become one of the kind of pioneers, leading people, and very knowledgeable around the intimate tech scene, sex tech, and health and well-being. And she's got some great stuff to share with us tonight about her overview about how that's moved forward in this last 10 years, but also particularly in this last year. Stephanie, over to you.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you to everyone watching. Time and attention are two very invaluable resources, and it's amazing that you've decided to spend them with us here this evening. So yes, I've spent the last decade researching and building companies in the sexual health and well-being space. So a different flavor of intimacy, perhaps, from things like smart sex toys to dating apps to apps that connect you with sexual counselors or therapists to sex events and beyond. And my instructors at university always told me that you must define the terms when you're speaking to questions. And so intimacy, to me, I really like this concept of into me see, or into you I see. So behaviors or products that help us see or be more of myself, or help others to see and experience more of me, and vice versa. And for sex, this is absolutely vital. So I wanted to touch very quickly on two areas. Firstly, the sex tech industry and what we can learn from it in terms of helping us forecast the future of virtual spaces and how we connect with each other. And then maybe perhaps lay some of the groundwork for discussion of personal data, and especially data harvesting, which is happening more and more frequently today. So what can we learn from the sex tech and sexual well-being industries? Well, the sex industry, especially pornography, has been a real key driver of technology for decades. Pornography was one of the reasons that internet payments was first created. It has been the decider of different technologies versus others. And so it can be a really interesting litmus test for other shifts across different industries and across the internet. So what are we currently seeing? Well, since COVID restrictions started to appear across the world, and I'm sure you've all experienced them, we've seen really big shifts in sexual behavior, including a rise in online pornography searches, sex toy sales online rather than in store. Dating app downloads have increased a huge amount. And very interestingly, a lot more posting of explicit content online on social media. Which suggests that when opportunities for the pursuit of in-person partnered sex are perhaps a little bit more limited, people are opting for online and solo activities instead. And there was a recent study here in the UK, and I saw many of you saying that you're coming from the UK here in the audience this evening. A recent study found that about 44% of people felt that the quality of their sex life in COVID times had decreased, which is a pretty substantial amount of people. But actually, 1 in 5 also reported making new additions to their sex life since the pandemic began. And the most common of those new additions included sexting, sending sexually explicit texts, sending nude photos more to people, sharing sexual fantasies, watching more pornography, searching for more sex-related information and education online, filming oneself masturbating, and acting more on sexual fantasies. And I think one of the reasons this is so interesting is that the most common additions are not entirely new technologies being created or adopted. Mostly it's using existing and trusted technology in new ways, perhaps that are more exposing, but definitely more intimate. More and more people are turning to live online content instead of using pre-recorded content. We've seen a huge increase in sex workers using live stream platforms to reach new customers. And interesting shifts like the destigmatization of platforms like OnlyFans that use paywalls for exclusive content where you see a little bit deeper into creators' lives. And one of the key elements here is the ability to not just connect with something live as a passive viewer, but being able to interact with a performer or a content creator, impact what is happening live, and even change the narrative. So a really great example of one of the things that has really grown over the past couple of years is, for example, communities that have sprung up hacking sex toys or coding games for people who are live camming. So for example, you could click a button, send $1 and roll a dice and get a random outcome for the performer, for example, setting a different vibration pattern if they're currently using a vibrator as part of their performance, or opting for a different activity to be performed during that performance. And in similar vein, a lot of the events, normally in-person physical events that happen around sexual health and well-being, be that workshops, education talks, or even sex parties, things like orgies, they've all turned online. And there are many examples of companies, for example, like Skirt Club, which creates and curates safe spaces for bi-curious and bisexual women to explore and enjoy their sexuality. They've really successfully taken those physical spaces and put them online. But this hyper acceleration of moving to online spaces that COVID has caused has also thrown up some really vital questions in terms of how we protect ourselves when putting intimate details online. How can I be sure no one is recording me at an online sex party I'm attending, for example? And I've always been really passionate about privacy and data, because while I believe that it can be a huge asset and really great to use personal data to personalize products and experiences, the potential for harm is pretty high. Smart sexual health companies have often been held to a really high account when it comes to the way that they use data, which makes total sense. We're not talking about your favorite song that you play over and over, or which brand of toothpaste you always buy from your online supermarket. Customer data when it comes to sexual health, sex toys, could include things like how, when, where you masturbate or have sex. The kind of information most people don't really talk about in real life. And of course, across the world, sometimes that data can be even more dangerous. For example, data on who uses a hookup app or an LGBTQ app in places with laws against being gay is one example. But personal data is kind of what drives the smart in smart sex toys. allowing users to save settings they like, create unique pleasure profiles, or learn what gives themselves or their partners pleasure. A little bit like sex more generally, if you communicate what you like in bed, you're more likely to have a good experience. But the most important thing that I think I want you to take away, if you take one thing away, is that we're currently living in a time where we aren't valuing or we aren't advocating enough for consent when it comes to dealing with consumer corporates and customers when it comes to agreement. So if we look at the idea of consent when it comes to data and privacy, consent is really important. It must be informed and it must be enthusiastic. So everyone needs to understand what data is being collected, what the boundaries are, and then make an active choice to go ahead and part with that data or share that data. And unfortunately, when it comes to where we are today, the vast majority of companies, whether they be tech companies, sexual health company, perhaps not sexual health companies, but a little bit, many of these companies are asking for agreement, which is not the same as consent. They will point you towards a policy or a user agreement that is often thousands of words long and in really complicated legal jargon, and perhaps even ask you to accept this before they'll let you use your product. For example, WhatsApp most recently forced all of its users to go through an agreement tick box in order to keep using WhatsApp. And can you really give informed consent to thousands of words of legal jargon you probably haven't read, and that would probably bore you to sleep if you even tried to read it? If this were a kind of practice that we used in sex, we'd call this kind of agreement compliance or even coercion. It's essentially saying, if you want this kind of relationship with me as a company, you must give me your data, or you must let me access your data. And so a couple of the key questions for me that we can perhaps talk about a little bit more in the discussion are how much responsibility lies with people versus companies when it comes to data collection and protecting people's data? And as we become more intimate online, how can we empower consumers to demand more from companies that are actively harvesting and using their data? So I'll hand back. Oh, I think you're muted, Gillian.
There, I'm in. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Stephanie. It was very much a really great input, pulling us into the personal data debate. As we were discussing in our preparation together, it's very interesting that this word consent, which is so important in relationship to, for example, the We Too movement and everything around sexuality, is actually the other key word that we need to be looking at very closely in relationship to our personal data. So we'll come back to that, like you say, definitely. So now I'd like to actually ask Clemence Debage to come in and join us. And I'll hand over to Clemence, who is actually in London with us and is one of the youngest panelists, I think, but is emerging through as a choreographer and a dancer using very close work with telepresence, sensors and motion capture.
Thank you for the intro. So I'm going to share some slides as well. Let me get this up. There we go. Okay, you should be able to see this. Yeah? I'm going to assume it's a yes. Please stop me if you can't see anything.
We can see them. We can see them.
Perfect, thank you. All right, thank you for the intro, Glenn, and thank you very much for inviting me to join. So, as you said, I'm a dance artist. I'm also an interaction designer and a creative technologist, and I really work at the intersection between dance and technology. And I'm partly interested in designing interactions with the audience and all between performance that are kind of enabled by technology. And my work tends to revolve around empathy, harassment and control. But since the beginning of the pandemic, I've had kind of a really strong focus on remote interactions. And I've been using telepresence and network wearables and really exploring notions of intimacy further. So as we've been talking so far, it's definitely not a new area of investigation. It's been in artists and research lab for many decades. But for me in my art practice, it kind of became a necessity due to the beginning of the pandemic and kind of forced me to go into this direction much faster. So I'm just going to kind of present you a bit of a collage of my reflections on the matter so far. So one thing I've been really interested in is really the role of touch in our virtual interactions. And mainly because of starting from the health impact of the lack of touch and how this has been kind of pushed by the necessities of the pandemic. So we know that lack of touch can have a really big influence on depression, anxiety, even impact your heart rate and blood pressure. So I've been looking into kind of companies like virtual touch by Emerge.io, allowing you to kind of feel 3D shapes through kind of ultrasound. There's also that remote hand holding product by Frebel. And that kind of ability to be able to touch each other has been really at the forefront of my latest project called actually Remote Intimacy. How convenient. So I've been working with a dancer in London and one in New York performing live together in that virtual space. And beyond just using more kind of traditional telepresence tools, we felt at some point it was really key for us to build this physicality and this sense of touch between the two performers. And we know, in the dance world, feeling the other person's body is so important in building that sense of intimacy between the performers. So we've been working with, I've been creating this, those jackets that are actually connected through the server and are embedding haptic feedback and capacitive sensors, allowing them to touch across borders in real time during the performance. And then I've been kind of researching a bit more about haptic feedback and haptic suits, and I've been really interested in some very early tests that are happening with those suits in VR social environments, and how that could lead to more embodied and physical interactions in virtual space. Additionally, I'm really interested in also how can we maybe blend that physical and virtual environment and start thinking about new intimate rituals. So obviously this is again not a new area of investigation, but I'm really interested in how can we maybe bring this into more of our daily lives. So been kind of talking about how to visualize interactions, how to visualize that virtual communication with physical objects, and how to bring that sense of co-presence, which has been a really important kind of inquiry for me when starting performing remotely, and how to build that sense of intimacy with the audience. One of the pieces I did since the beginning of the pandemic is called Strings, where I'm actually wearing wearables and giving the audience the ability to control my movement from a distance. But beyond the interesting aspects of control behind that project, what was really interesting is what we did around the user interface and how we could visualize the presence of others throughout our different interactions on the user interface. And by seeing where people are and what they're doing in real time, how to bring that notion of togetherness without being talking heads on a screen. So we can start imagining a new kind of other rituals to bring people together and kind of start building more emotional tools to build this sense of presence. And I just want to point out how those questions are kind of keep coming back, but how now technology is so accessible that those small interaction games can be built very easily and cheaply. So on that yo-yo machine example, they've got a lot of those DIY kits they're building, and just the board that is being used is less than £20, and it's becoming more and more accessible for everyone to start playing around and enabling kind of makers to make them to do their own. And then next up, I'm also quite interested in how our sense of empathy might be impacting our real life interactions and how we're kind of closing the loop there. So we've seen some really interesting example of VR being used to increase our sense of empathy, using this as a way to kind of walk in someone else's shoes, and the machine to be another is a really interesting example. But on the other side, we're seeing an increase in harassment in virtual reality and those virtual spaces, which is leading to an attempt of creating guidelines to design those environments in a more kind of safe way and a more inclusive way. But I also kind of raised the question of what set of rules and values we use in our virtual interaction, and kind of having this sense of this is not real, this is not a real person, I can do pretty much what I want, and raising questions around consent and kind of body sovereignty in those virtual spaces. And I was quite interested in kind of exploring that tension between that shift of values we're having when it's in real life and when it's more kind of gamified or in a virtual environment. So this piece I'm showing here is called Bother, where the audience is invited to they've got two big buttons, very shiny buttons, really playing with kind of the references from the gaming industry, and they can decide on the scale of emotions to affect the dancer that's in front of them. What's been really interesting is how much are we feeling empathetic towards the person that's in front of us? Is this a game, so can I push the limits, or do I feel that I'm actually affecting the real person? And just also on this topic, I'm also interested in how is this going to affect the way we then interact back into our day-to-day life when we interact in real life with people. And then on the last kind of topic I'm really interested in, we've started talking about this quite a lot, is the privacy and kind of free will issues we might face when it comes to those virtual environments. And we know that it only takes 5 minutes of data on only kind of tracking of the head and the hands to identify a person. So we've also seen that in the Tempest, for example, which is a live VR show. The actors are able to recognize returning audience members by just having their heads and hand movement, and they can identify who they are. We know that there's a lot of data that is being shared at a 90x frequency when interacting in VR. And if we only have 5 minutes of data needed to identify a person, we can ask questions around privacy or copyright, or even questions around surveillance, where we know that we can use gait analysis in a forensic situation to identify people on CCTV. And then finally, just as a last piece of work, we also know that motion data can be used to start having some predictions around mental illness, predicting personality and behaviors, which kind of cause also all sorts of ethical issues in terms of making use of the data that we're using in a more recreational way, and how that could potentially inform who we are, who we might be, and who is able to use that bits of data and information. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Clemence, and fantastic input there, both around the empathy and around this privacy side of the data, and we'll come back to that again. And actually perfect for the whole series, really good stuff. So I'm going to invite Paul now to join us. Paul Miller. Oh no, Masaki, so sorry, wrong order. Masaki Fujihata, can I reach out to you to turn your mic on and your video and join me? Masaki in Tokyo, have we still got you with us? Hello, Masaki. Hello.
Sorry.
That's all right. Hello. Thank you. We know it's 2:30 in the morning there, or later now, 3 o'clock in the morning. So thank you. Masaki has inspired many of us across the years through his very, very pioneer integration of the physical and virtual, and particularly the virtual and the virtual, with diverse forms of virtual spaces, which for me have pointed way out to the future. So please do share with us a bit of your thinking. And we will put some information in the chat box so that people can link to your work onwards as well. Thank you, Masaki.
Thank you for inviting me to join this interesting meeting. Today, I would like to show one series of projects on the internet. Because I have many projects. Maybe there is some other project that might suit with the topic, but today I only show 2 pieces. Can I use share the screen? Yeah, I can do it.
You're sharing.
Yes. So this is the wow. How can I control this? This was a project I realized in 1998. It's very early. It was a prominent moment of the internet came into our society. So the idea is under the concept of meta monument. How can we build a monument in the cyberspace? So in this case, I set it up 49 light bulbs, and people can control each of these light bulbs from the internet. So this is the recorded data from the project. About 2 years ago, I compiled it. But at the actual situation, people came here. I mean, here means the website. This is also interesting topic we should discuss here or there. So the project site is there, but the people can go there from their own location. So when someone click one of the lamp, then the lamp status of the lamp will change. These are the list of the domain name we can see, and we can understand where they came. So it's a kind of sharing the space, but also people can chase. So in this case, one of the guy every day in the morning he tried to make a shape of heart. This was so funny, and then it will be destroyed by someone later. Let's see. It is 8 o'clock in the morning. Then some of the people came on the office, and someone start to play with this place. So I would like to add one thing, because while they play with this website, people can recognize the other person's existence, especially when someone see the other person's activity. We start to think about, oh, there is another one with me at the same place. Oops. Sorry, I stop it. Then this was a very experiment, and actually, please imagine it was 1999. We don't have a video stream. So each time when you access to the site, then the server will return one single picture back to the user. So this was the situation. But even with this very subtle connection between the user and the site, people can recognize the system and the time of the transferring the data, and also some other one's existence on the same page. So I think this can be connected with the kind of intimacy, virtual intimacy. And then another piece I would like to show you today is a very recent project. Me and other people try to realize one exhibition on the internet. Okay, this one. Yeah, this one. No, sorry. I would like to show the other one. Not this one. Wow, complicated. Sorry. Yeah, this one. Yeah, so this is the main gate for the exhibition site, and here is 7 different art pieces are set it up by using iframe technology. People can go to these different exhibitions set it up by each artist. And some of the artists doing performance, someone is doing live stream, someone doing some performance. The performance is scheduled. People need to attend at the exact timing. And my piece here it is okay. Oh, yeah. Another feature of this exhibition is oh, it's very complicated. Okay. So this is the main gate, and you can see there is a people 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 12 people is here, and people can talk each other. So the technician engineering side set it up a chat, voice chat, enables voice chat along the website. So when you go into this website at a certain moment, people can talk each other, and the organizer did some tour to the exhibition. Then I'm going to show you my piece. My piece is titled White Balance. So this is the actual page. The design a little bit similar, and the user can change this bar. So this bar is connected to the light at the server side. Okay, but yeah. Okay, then I will show you. Very complicated. I will show you another one. The view from the actual site. This is the one, and then change to this one. Yeah. So you can see the behind the scene. So this is the server, and there is the real object. It's a model of White House, and LED light was controlled by the user. So each time the color changed, but the camera has a white balance function. Then the white balance try to make it white. So the technology can change the color, neutralize to white. Okay. I wanna tell you why, because all of us already know this, the happenings on the 6th of January in Congress of the US. And then some of the people said, maybe the name of the white balance is a problem. So because it should be in a rainbow. Universalized, you know. So then the idea came out from there. Then I attached to the technology. So it is showing the power of the technology. Every different color can be integrated, neutralized to white. So this is a kind of technology behind us. So we've been believing this, experience through the technology is real. But somehow we have to be conscious. Someone can control it, or autonomously system can do such kind of changes. So this is a kind of, for me, this is interesting, also important aspect when we deal with the technology. Okay, I would like to stop here.
No, thank you, Misaki. And I think you've brought forward some very important points there around remote control, particularly in relationship to intimacy. And it links back into the personalization point Stephanie was making too. How do we run those two things together? And additionally, I'd like to point out that when you talked about recognizing other people's existence, that actually that's what is key to intimacy and empathy. That's what we're doing. And we're trying to really, and your pieces show that, recognition of others' existence and how we connect those together.
So maybe the key word is the imagination. I didn't talk. So imagination, how we can kick the imagination of the others.
Yes, of the others. Yeah. Great. Well, that's perfect crossover into having the input from Paul Miller, aka VJ Spooky. So I'll ask Misaki to turn the video off and Paul to join me for his input. Now, Paul has reached out and engaged from the music sector, but film and everything, writer, author, with many people across time and space for many years, and actually has used these connections, these diverse connections, both digital and physical, to actually put across a lot of his work around activism in relationship to Black Lives Matters and many other eco scenes too. So Paul, I'll hand over to you.
Sure. First and foremost, Ghislaine, thanks for inviting me to participate. And greetings, everyone. I'm just outside of New York in an area called the Southamptons. It's a long story, but yeah, I'm an urban refugee at the moment. Do not feel like being downtown. All right, so can you guys see the images that I'm putting up? I just want to make sure. Can you, Ghislaine, are you seeing?
Yes,
it should be okay. All right. So considering we're talking about remote intimacy, it's been a pleasure to see everyone's discussions. And I'm also a fan of Masaki Fujihata's work. So, nice to meet. And what Stephanie's up to and everyone who's presented, it's been really a pleasure to see. So here we are. This is a project where I took a studio to Antarctica and I went to several of the main ice fields. The idea was to do what I call acoustic portraits of ice.
Oh, hello. I think we might have lost Paul for a moment. I hope, can somebody let me know that you can hear me? Oh, Paul's coming back. Oh, great. Good, Paul. We can see you again. If you turn your mic on for us.
That's bizarre. I don't know what happened there. That was weird.
I don't
So
think these things happen and none of us know if it's you or us or each of us, but we worked out there. Your voice is a little bit wobbly. Can you talk to us a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I'm at a high-speed internet hub even. It should be totally fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, slightly robotic voice. Yeah, so why don't we just talk together for a few minutes and then we'll go back and see if you stabilized in that time, yeah? So do you think that would be good?
Sure. Well, let me just start my presentation. And okay, so let's see if this works. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to put up a couple images and hopefully they won't break the internet here. I don't know what that was about, but all right. So I've been in mid-sentence about Antarctica. And Antarctica is one of the most remote places on Earth. But amusingly enough, it was named by the Greeks. The ancient Greeks, one of the things that really struck me about this conversation is we navigate social space based on this idea of applying strange metaphors to essentially what's an etherealized situation. Many of us are obviously distributed across the world, and we're using this distributed network of the internet, which is different than the web. I mean, I always want to point that out. So there's a kind of a certain architecture, and even the fact that many of us are on these tiles, it looks like a historically amusing show called The Brady Bunch, for example. We keep using metaphors from previous eras to overlay our current moment. So when I was in Antarctica, I was working on a series of projects called that I like to call acoustic portraits of ice. So let me show you guys a couple kind of primers, and I'm going to jump around a little bit because that threw my presentation off a little bit, but here we go. So recently, Fox News has had a whole situation where they've been trying to derail President Biden's agenda. And they literally had an icon of a cow farting because of the methane the cow generates. And Fox News was saying that, Biden was going to take away your cheeseburgers, which I found amusing because here we are in the 21st century, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and information itself has become hyper weaponized. And what's intriguing about that is that information is a reflection of public space. It's a reflection of public discourse. And the internet has become kind of the central hub of our data-driven society. Now, I'm going to kind of tie this into Antarctica from the viewpoint of one thing and one thing only. The idea that hyper-consumption and the idea that overconsumption is now driving our sort of social and global narrative. Antarctica is one of the most remote places on Earth, but it's affected by everything we do, much in the same way. For example, this Zoom call is probably consuming a significant amount of electricity, which then, of course, is derived from fossil fuel consumption, and that powers the electrical grid. Meanwhile, the particles that are generated by all of those data centers, burning fossil fuels or using various resources, even if you drive a Tesla, you have to plug the Tesla in. The Tesla is then connected to the power grid. The power grid is then generating electricity based generally on fossil fuels, coal, et cetera. We're trying as much as possible to switch out of that, but the legacy of this is conditioned by this kind of slide you see on your screen. This idiot talking about, you can see a cow farting and it's blowing up the world, which actually, amusing enough, is actually a reasonably correct assessment. The video is far more concise than the lunatic Fox presenter would have you believe. Methane released by cows in the agriculture industry is actually quite huge. So next slide. This is a slide from one of the first global performances that took place simultaneously. It was Nam June Paik in 1973. He's a big influence on my thinking. This is called Global Groove. And amusingly enough, as a DJ, Global Groove really made me think about the way that we have to think about synchronizing different ideas of pattern recognition. I'm going to tie this back to Antarctica and to several other current projects. But at the end of the day, at foundation, the internet allows us to kind of create this notion of a virtual social space, what the ancient Greeks would have called agora. But the ancient Greeks also named the Arctic Circle and Antarctica, but they never went there. They created the linguistic tools to describe a social space that they had never been to. And the Arctic just stands, if ever anyone reads Greek, it just means Arcturus, which means constellation of the bear. So what they would do is navigate. If you're in the Mediterranean, you look up at the stars, you have a specific group of stars that you would navigate by, and you're good to go. So they're like, wait a second, we need an opposite of the bear. So they said Antarcturus, opposite of the bear. So amusingly enough, Antarctica was a place they never went to. They never experienced as a social context, but they were able to use this notion of sort of creating an imaginary space in language to describe it. To me, that's what Nam June Paik did with Global Groove at that time in 1973. He did a sort of an update of that. And from my perspective as a DJ, many of the concerts I do are usually based on physical proximity, creating large-scale music festivals, and above all, that idea that pattern recognition has now become part of the basic fabric of social life. This is another one of my favorite composers who inspires my work, and I'm gonna dive back into my work in a second, but I thought context would be helpful. This is John Cage performing he was one of the first composers to write music for turntables. In 1939, he wrote a piece called Imaginary Landscape. And basically, if you were the audience, you went into a room and there was a bunch of skipping record players and weird frequencies of stations that were unoccupied on the radio. And intriguingly enough, that notion of open frequencies and skipping records, one could fast forward, to our time, and that would just be the equivalent of doing the Zoom call and then having it be to open spaces in the Zoom call. So, similar premise. Now, intriguingly enough and amusingly enough, that piece was called Imaginary Landscape. And the notation for Imaginary Landscape is kind of about creating a legible space for the musicians to create points of navigation. From my perspective, these are things that are also part of this idea that the composer and the artist give us better tools for critical thinking, better points to navigate the compositions that we generate. Again, how we think about the 21st century and its legacy from the 20th century is that we're moving from an analog sense of space to a hyper algorithmically driven sense of space. So remote intimacy here, if you think about the term algorithm, it comes from an Arabic term, al-Khwarizmi, he was a mathematician. That's literally his name, by the way. And by the way, he was Arabic. He was at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad several centuries ago at the height of the Muslim Renaissance. So Europe didn't even have algebra at that time. Algebra also, amusing enough, is an Arabic term. So most of the tools that we're using, there's kind of a cultural and political calculus at work. When you start to think about the tools that allow us as creators to exchange with our audiences, we've all had to pivot. And that pivot has made us, if you think about inequality, if you think about the economics that kind of undergird this, web-centric world we're in right now, you can easily see that Nam June Paik's work and John Cage's were pretty good DNA for thinking about those kinds of pattern recognition initiatives and the role of the arts and music in creating, new perceptions of the space. So let's go back to Antarctica. But by way of a couple of projects. Much of my work is about thinking about DJ culture and contemporary art from the viewpoint of pattern recognition. And then, amusingly enough, how that gets applied to social space can be remixed. And remixed culture, sampling, collage. I'm just going to show you a couple of bits and pieces here because I want to respect the time. But essentially, some of my current projects are looking at that notion of pattern recognition in a data-driven society. And I've been thinking more and more about the layers that DJ culture can unpack because it's about polytempo, polyrhythm, and above all, polytonality, many rhythms going simultaneously. And how we synchronize that is kind of a resonant with the internet itself. One could argue DJing is kind of playing with information and pattern recognition. They just happen to be called beats. So at the end of the day, much of the stuff I'm talking about is kind of in the realm of the last century's struggle with the industrialization of the sort of collective imagination. And if you think about writers like, oh God, where to begin? André Breton, if you think about Marot and the idea of the invisible museum, these are all things that were part of the vocabulary of artists struggling with how to represent some of the more abstract spaces of that transition after World War I into this kind of more and more abstract space. So John Cage's Imaginary Landscapes, anything by Salvador Dali, choreography by people like Merce Cunningham, or the sort of stream of consciousness narratives of Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. The list goes on. So much of that has been inherited in the viewpoint of how we think about how we orient in a culture that's driven by algorithms. To me, at least, the way I'm using these metaphors right now is kind of putting it together from the viewpoint of the arts of the politics of perception. So here we go, back to Antarctica, and I'm going to just do a quick run through, and I'm happy to unpack any of these.
Yeah,
what I ended up doing,
we're really running out of time. We're only going to have about 10 minutes to chat, and it's not entirely your fault because of the tech stuff, but yeah, just a very quick, please. 1 minute would be great.
Yeah, let's do a 1 minute. I'm going to fast forward. Okay, cool. This is the internet in 1969. 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the internet, and I was commissioned to do a symphony celebrating that was hosted by some of the people who wrote the original source code that allows for packet switching. And it's again we are inhabiting a mathematical space. You can easily see that there's 4 nodes by December 1969, and you're seeing an exponential growth of nodes. The first 2 nodes of the internet, what's called ARPANET back then, was between UCLA and Stanford Research Institute. You fast forward to now, and how would you do a visual representation of that? I ended up having a string quartet play the algorithmic expansion of the internet, and then had a chorus singing that. So these are projects that essentially are about performance, about festivals, but they're also kind of engaging with the mechanisms of the algorithmic and mathematical architecture of how we think about music and data. So I could go deeper into that, but I just want to respect the time. And there we go. So nice. There we go.
I'm really sorry that we haven't got enough time. And I have to apologize to the audience that we were a little late starting too. So we did lose a few minutes at the beginning. So I am going to go straight to everybody, bring everybody back in. Thank you all very much. We have got 3 questions in the question box. I'm going to kind of summarize through them. One of them, Naomi, actually, around actually the most accessible tools for audience presence and intimacy, because of course most people can't afford the more expensive tools that maybe many artists are using. So actually, I think there's some things that that even attendees could add into the chat box for this. What are you using at home to actually make these pieces during this lockdown period, which has been quite simple? Like, for example, I've got a very cheap setup with green screen and lights around me, which was cost £135 from Newer, and I use that. So if that could be put in the chat box to help Naomi and others, that would be great. What are the accessible tools that everybody's using for presence and intimacy during this time period? And then we've got a question from Antonella, which is looking at place of feelings and emotions of physical bodies using devices. So I'm going to wrap that into a question to the panelists around the empathy. And actually, that was brought up by a couple of the panelists, by Clemens particularly used the word empathy, but it's also coming through into all your work, but into Stephanie's work too. I want to ask actually, Rebecca, if you'd come in on that, about how you've thought about empathy in relationship to maybe your more recent work with VR.
I know people have called VR recently the empathy machine. I always have these 2 feelings about technology, the pros and cons. I mean, it could be as much an empathy machine as the opposite of that. You can use VR in a very destructive way, obviously. So for me, there's nothing intrinsic about VR, for instance, that makes it empathetic, except for the fact that it, as I mentioned at the end of my talk, you can be in the same space. It may be that both of you are in the same virtual space or in this kind of shared augmented reality space. And just the fact, even if it's virtual, I've tried this and experimented with some of my VR work of having a virtual human figure come up right close into your physical space, and I get the reactions from people. People really respond to that, even though intellectually they know the character is virtual. But it shows how I think it shows the power of virtual space, that it's a huge illusion machine, and it's tricking our perceptual system. And from that, I think it can evoke something like empathy, in the same way that playing with perception is what can bring about empathy as well. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm muted because I was typing into the chat box, and I've done that before you tapping. So thank you, Rebecca. Does anybody else want to add in there about empathy? I mean, Masaki, your work too. You're creating that the acknowledgement of that we start to understand actually that we are existing and that we can make those existences. But have you got an add-in to do around empathy for us?
But in general, empathy is a very important topic from the beginning of the cinema. So how, for the director, how can control audience to believe this is a heroine or hero? So then audience can have some empathy and can go into the story. So I think this is not so new when we discuss about the situation between the human and the image. So, but we've been expecting something more than the images. So that is the situation we are facing. So in the theater, cinema theater, we only can see the image, but by using technology, we can add more interactivity. So I don't know, the situation is too complex. Maybe, but sometimes we should better to think back again how the cinema was made. So we can go on back. We can, yeah. That's the situation, I think.
Well, it is true, actually, and I think it's quite amazing for people coming from performing arts and theatre that, of course, many of the interaction techniques that we talk about today are absolutely a base performing arts training. And of course, about presence on stage, there's a lot of writing, like Peggy Phelan's work, etc., in that area of presence. And I'd like to add into what you just said, Maria Almina in the questions is asking exactly that, about how much freedom do you give your audience when you're actually designing your interfaces. And that would relate into theatre and live performance too, which I know Maria is from a live performance background. And in the chat too, Stacey Pizzolides is looking at the ideas of consent and relationship to control and remix that were mentioned by many of the panelists, and points out that it's linked to power relations, which is really important in relationship to digital reliance for intimacy. So maybe we just move back actually now to Stephanie and Clements. I'd like to bring you in around the body data side and the whole area of consent, and any other comments from other panelists too around this, because it would be good to get different views. But the whole area of data harvesting, which this whole series is based on. And we are going to talk about this in the final talk in this series on the 9th of June, which we'll put the information up at the end of this seminar, so the links will go up. But actually, we're going to talk really clearly there about the whole issues of body data harvesting in relationship to, in particular, to immersion experiences. Because for me, it's something that has been worrying me for a while, that actually as artists, whether it's VR, AR, XR, and even as creatives working in immersion experiences in the big companies, which have been going many years, of course, these entertainment and Disney things, but also fun fairs used to be that, but now they're digital. Yeah. So how this data is gathered and is zoomed back into the cloud and doesn't belong to us anymore. And we know that this is happening now in airports everywhere. That gathering of data is either sold to or from corporates, governments, and police surveillance systems, and different in different countries with very little regulation. Only the EU really is discussing and talking about this regulation, even last week with the mass biometric surveillance regulations that they're starting to talk about. So what I am aware, of course, is that for many small companies, that data stream that you're gathering, and I'd like to bring Stephanie in on this actually in a creative industry sense, yeah, but it does relate to the arts too, are gathering that personal data, because actually downline, about 3 or 4 years down line, it seems to be one of the key revenue income streams for those companies to survive. For the corporates, they probably make 50 to 100,000 a year off all of our data without it coming to us. But Stephanie, how do you see this debate in relationship to the SME scene in creative industries?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and one of increasing importance, I think, as more and more of our data is captured, stored in different places that we have no idea where it is, and then, as you mentioned, shared with other people too, often without our consent, or even being informed that it's even happening in the first place, which is even a step back, much more concerning. I think from a small business perspective, and I can speak especially to the sexual health and well-being sector, a lot of the companies that are being founded within this space, people are thinking about security and about privacy from the very get-go. So, for example, it was very obvious to us when we first started the company Mystery Vibe back in 2014 that nothing was unhackable anymore. Pretty much anything could be hacked. You couldn't create something that you knew would be absolutely secure. And so you had to take that into account when you were designing the product, when you were designing the software, the connection between the two. And for us, it was really important to make sure that we not only communicated to customers what data, if any, was being collected, because we made a very deliberate decision not to collect or store any customer data about how they were using our smart products. You have to communicate that with them. You have to get their active consent, not their tacit consent. And then also make a commitment to keep upgrading the security of your products as you can, and as more technology exists to do that, and to keep communicating with your customers at every single stage. And also we kind of made a decision that if we would ever collect data in the future, that there would be a choice with the consumer as to whether or not they participated in that data collection, and how that data was then used. Data should belong to the person ultimately. And it feels like a lot of the young companies starting up in this space also share similar values and similar mindsets. There, of course, have been scandals in the space, and especially when it comes to sex toys, if something is hacked, it becomes national, if not international news. But we must also remember that data, body data, can provide some very useful insights for people making products and helping to personalize things to you. So, for example, a smart sex toy that knows exactly how you like to be touched could perhaps even help a partner learn how to touch you more intimately or better for you. So there's kind of two sides to it, but yeah.
And as we said at the beginning, we're not trying to come to the answers here. This is why we're having these debates over the next few months. So, Clemence, do you see any debate about this happening at the smaller level of artist side, or is it just we all get on with it and we don't think about this until later? Because that's what's been worrying me for a few years.
Well, I mean, coming from a movement practice, I'm really interested in what's happening in capturing motion data. And at a large scale, and I'm really interested in the fact that, you know, when we share our data with or without real consent, most of the time the research kind of shows that people are not really concerned when it contributes to those kind of micro models. But when we know that a person can be identified by their motion data, then nothing is just contributing to the macro, because we can dive into the micro very quickly. So I'm also interested in how the fact that we can't really hide those micro movements. And even with highly trained performers who know how to work with their bodies, changing the gaze of the eyes, the small movement that shows a nervousness or a discomfort, and all of that is not something we can actually control for a long period of time. So there is a great opportunity in the health industry, but how does that translate to collecting all the data, and how we're going to be perceived as an individual by potentially big players? And then obviously we're being held hostage a little bit by are behind those big platforms. And, you know, we're talking about Facebook, who just sold like millions of Quests, and a lot of people are starting using those devices. And we know that they're not being very trustworthy with the way the data is being used. But at the same time, we're kind of being starving for those interactions. So people are kind of going with the devices and not really knowing the consequences of it.
So I'd like to bring in Paul now, because I'd like to actually have your thoughts, Paul, on the collection of data of this type. And like Clement says, you know, even the tiny little nuances, but particularly things like gait and facial recognition, and how that relates into the issues of diversity and inclusivity. But actually also in this particular question, of course, about the non-inclusivity of people. And how people are put on the edge or made outsiders by the setting of a norm within body data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a good friend of mine has a new film that just came out called Coded Bias. Joy Lamwini, I'm never sure I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's a professor at MIT who's African-American. And she noticed that facial recognition software doesn't collect information about women in a right way that allows them to be viewed. It also doesn't collect information about people of color. And she noticed that if she put a white mask on, like if I just had this piece of paper, the cameras are optimized for white skin. And it's really fascinating to see the legacy of the 20th century's chemical processes of generating photography and other things that then got prescribed into our current moment of facial recognition. Like your average cell phone is optimized for white skin. The facial recognition software doesn't pick up women's faces very well. All sorts of stuff. But as a musician and artist, what's fascinating is a lot of stuff like Spotify, SoundCloud, of course, Apple Music. The algorithmic recommendation engines are based on creating a data portrait of your taste. But so too with stuff like Cambridge Analytica and its use of weaponized information from Facebook during the 2016 election. What was fascinating about that is that they had a precise portrait of people's taste based on their Facebook history, and they were able to weaponize that for everything from Russian disinformation campaigns, computational propaganda, and above all, the way that algorithms could be used to radicalize people. So with the end result, stuff like QAnon, this January 6th insurrection, just one of the first political mass movements where no one even knew who the leader was, and they were all responding to recommendation engines. If you like this, you like that, and just going further and further down the rabbit hole. Intriguing enough, Europe, the whole GDPR, the General Data Protection thing, actually I find usually it's generally just an annoying pop-up window on your website. And it doesn't really do much, to be completely honest. And anyone who's a programmer, there's so many ways they're collecting data regardless. Even the controversy about Apple's tracking or not tracking on 14.5 OS update, they have other ways to make the money, and they have other ways to track the data. So the monetizing of all of our social interactions, it's ongoing. And so the way that they colonize these social spaces is by using algorithms to give you the illusion of privacy and the illusion of how your choices are going to be kept. I mean, Apple's a master of that. So I'm at a crossroads as a musician, because much of my work generally, I write classical music, so I've written music for choreographers, film. I just did a series of film project with Kronos Quartet a while ago, and they were in London, and their violinist was in San Francisco, and I was in New York, and we had to record the session live. And then they sent me the cello, the violin, and everything. Everybody was in separate rooms, literally on separate continents. So normally, I'm using air quotes, normal here, because I don't even know what is normal at this point, but it's how we think about, a chorus, for example, became a super spreader event at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a choir where the choir master asked everyone to come and sing, and their voices were singing, and everyone got COVID. So the intriguing thing right now, I just was fascinated, and even getting the vaccine passport, I'm skittish about, because they're going to use your bio data, and there's a lot of data mining and surveillance on the route of the vaccines, which, by the way, I hope everyone gets vaccinated. What I'm saying is, like, the medical data mining is also part of the American, kind of situation. So all of this is connected. It's not, it's heartbreaking. yeah,
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
we have to leave it there, which is really sad. But I do want to say one thing quickly. I put it in the chat. Coded Bias, Joy's film, is on Netflix at the moment in the UK, so we can watch that. And I'm intending to this coming weekend. She does
Brilliant.
she's done amazing work, actually, breakthrough in this. And I think some of us will have seen her work at the Barbican in the AI exhibition a couple of years ago. And also, I think this key point that has come up across most of these discussions now today, but I think we do, is this very delicate balance at the moment between the personalization, whether it's through digital intimacy, in whether in motion capture, in virtual worlds, in telepresence, or in intimacy tech, or whether, like Paul mentioned, in Spotify or in our Apple, we're getting, we love having that personalization. I love the stuff it sends me because it knows me. But the balance between that and the data collection around us, and the knowledge of us as individuals. And for me, that discussion puts us right on the line in relationship to being a virtual physical blended self, and actually how our interaction happens between our physical selves and our data selves, and in the future in relationship to metaverse worlds and our possible existence as avatars, data selves within those worlds, and maybe draws for me back to the body data space line on is that we do need to somehow continue to talk through the possibilities of ownership of our own personal data and the right for us to turn on and off and agree to or not agree to certain usage. But let's go onwards with that. And I'd like to invite you all panelists to join us to come into the attendees and add in some more on the 9th of June for the final debates, where we're going to go further around this data harvesting around the body, talk more about these areas. But thank you all really a lot. I'm sorry to the audience that we've run out of time. I do want to bring everybody back to the next 4 talks. And I believe that the team are now putting up into the chat room, into the panelists and attendees side, information about how to sign up for the next 3 talks. May the 19th, there'll be 2 actually, and on June the 9th. I'd like to thank the team too. Karen Ward and Fakar Azza, who have been working with me very closely to coordinate this whole series of events. And Bree Powell from Body Data Space, who has actually been working into the chat and will be pulling it out into the transcripts, which will go up online alongside the YouTube recording sometime next week, and we will send everyone the link. And also Jaylan Akbas, who's been supporting us through the slides and the chat room too. And to all the people involved in DATUM R&D, and thank you to University of Greenwich for allowing us to take these talks through the Innovate UK programme. Thank you to all attendees too. There's some great stuff in the chat, and I'll be definitely reading it tomorrow, and with Bree working on it to get it into a format that you can all read again. Thank you, Misaki, for staying up so late. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Clements. And thank you, Rebecca. And the night to everybody in our audience. I'll ask the panelists to stay with me until we go into the green room. Thank you.
Thank you.